It's great to be here. I'm going to start with a photo because the rest of the stuff I'm going to show you is kind of wonky and analytical. But since I was a photographer, I used to take pictures like this. This is in Peru. And it felt to me like I loved doing it, but it felt to me a little bit like a drive-by shooting. I was a privileged person from a privileged country going and taking pictures of poor people. So I got really uncomfortable with the power that I had as a photographer to represent and misrepresent other people's lives. And sort of went through my own identity crisis around that sort of stuff, still doing photography, but I ended up switching and doing a different sort of photography when I ran the Institute for Public Media Arts. Actually, I'm kind of curious, who here thinks that this is a poor or either maybe generously a mediocre photograph? Raise your hand, don't be bashful. Okay, well, good size of folks. So if I told you that this was taken by a blind teenager, how would it shift how you see the image? Okay, yeah. So for me, this picture changed my life, and it's by LaWanda. She's a blind photographer. I taught blind teenagers at Governor Moorhead School in North Carolina for several years how to do photography, and this was in the film days, so it was, every image costs money. And it changed my life because when the pictures came back, 36 pictures, we would describe each picture and what they would talk about what they intended to get, and then we would describe what we saw in the picture. And then sometimes, they're listening to the world around them to shoot, so they'd point too high or too low, and a lot of times. Sometimes they'd get really excited and they'd get it, right straight on. So when this came back, I told Wanda, well, you have a picture of the sidewalks, and I thought she maybe meant to get a tree or a friend on campus or something. Put it to the side, went to the next one, and she said, no, wait a minute. I meant to get a picture of the cracks in the sidewalk because my cane gets stuck in it, and it's a problem, and I want to get them fixed. So I took these pictures as proof of the damage, and she wanted to send it to the superintendent to get them fixed. And she wrote, "Dear Dr. Breitweiser, since you have the privilege of sight, you probably walk on these cracks every day and don't notice it. But for me, it's a problem, and for other students on campus." And what's so great about this is that LaWanda learned a language that wasn't her primary language to communicate, a visual language. It wasn't her primary language, to make it salient for the superintendent. And the cracks, of course, represent cracks across racial lines, gender lines. It's broader than just the cracks in the sidewalk. And so, even for me, I walked in these sidewalks every day to class, and I saw the cracks, but I didn't see the cracks, It was a totally different thing. So I thought this was interesting. This is the type of photography I sort of moved into, ones that were more non-traditional. But it's also, it shows the importance of context when you're doing photography, and I think more and more context is becoming really important. And then it was actually, I did a book called Seeing Beyond Sight with Chronicle Books that has all their photographs in it. And they're all sort of metaphors about how all of us see and don't see. And then this is the type of photography I sort of do now. This is a Polaroid 665 film, and it's at Burning Man, and it's this participatory art project called Why Do You Do What You Do? And we ask people to answer, why do you do what you do? And a statement, and hold it on a piece of paper. And now we've had 10,000 people all over the world answer it, and a lot of collaborating photographers collaborate on the project. So now I'm going to get into wonky stuff. So I did the big thaw. It's in 3 parts. It focuses on the old paradigm and the dissonance that was created by that, new and emerging realities, and the future. And you can download it at thebigthaw.com. It's a free PDF, or if you don't want to read it on your screen, since it's 100 pages, you can order a print copy. And just as background, it was for the Media Consortium, and it was a group of 45 leading progressive publications like Mother Jones, Talking Points Memo, The Nation, and stuff. And we had a lot of interviews with experts, a lot of good data. So I'm just going to hit the basic top view of it. And you can go to the report for the specific trends, but I'll just hit the sort of basic essence of it. So we built the whole report on this it's called strategic dissonance. And it's a model that was created by Andy Grove, who was chairman of Intel. And it basically has growth up the x-axis, or the y-axis, and time across the x-axis. And this is looking at the history of the change in journalism, how the paradigm shift is happening. So the old paradigm grew for a number of years. And in the mid-1990s, just as we all know, there was this inflection point. And that's when one set of industry dynamics began to give way to another set of industry dynamics. It's the whole online revolution. So it happened in the 1990s. And then from that time to this time, it's either that journalism organizations and people, and this is very firm-based, but I think it still can apply to individual journalists, either you adapt and you grow or you don't adapt. But the key thing is that there's this strategic recognition, and this is a little bit wonky, but that's that the time between when it first began to change and 10 years later is normal for industries to adapt. It sometimes takes a decade for companies or industries to recognize when the industry dynamics began to change and then what that means, when it's significant, and what are the trends that are most significant for changing your strategy. So this sort of is how we set up the whole thing. And there's a dissonance gap between that point in time that we all know very well when it changed and the recognition. And that's when there's conflicting opinions, there's disagreements about what's most important, but it's that dissonance that allows us to identify where the opportunities are. It's the dissonance that allows us to know which direction to go. And we set it up around 4 questions. So how do you turn dissonance into action? And this is sort of the framework. And we had 4 questions, and it's on this matrices. And the first question cuts across left to right, and it starts with, how is the competitive landscape changing? There's a bunch in the report about this, but one simple thing is that we have new abundances and new scarcities that never existed before. So the abundances are obviously information and voices. Like independent voices was a problem before because you couldn't get independent voices in mainstream media. But now there's so many independent voices. Anybody can have a voice. The new scarcities are that time and money used to be an old scarcity, but now the new scarcities include it's time, money, reputation, and attention. And to think about those scarcities and how that changes the landscape. And the key is that it connects then to what the new capabilities are to succeed. So this relationship, there's a dissonance between these two. And the dissonance is because they evolve independently. The competitive landscape changes, and then the competencies that organizations or that you have as media makers can lag behind how the competitive landscape changes. So that's very abstract, so I'll give you a very concrete example. So with the new abundances of information, that's part of what the new competitive landscape is. So on this end, with the capabilities that are needed, it means the need for coverage goes down. Before newspapers, it was their responsibility to cover if they were a watchtower, cover everything in their purview. That was their responsibility. The need for that isn't as great anymore because you have bloggers, you have so many people covering things. You still need to cover, but the responsibility to cover everything has gone down. You don't need the deep bench of reporters anymore. The need for balancing points of view isn't as strong anymore. You still need to do that, but it's not as strong. And then like engagement and aggregation and targeting niches goes up. So that's just a very simple example of that tension. The next 2 questions are, what needs can be met, problems solved, and desires fulfilled? This is all about understanding what customers want, not what we think they should want. Like, this is a great story. People should pay attention to it. It's like finding out from users, from consumers, what do they want? What needs does this meet, or what problems does it solve? And then connecting that to business models, which is the 4th question. How do you structure organizations? How do you structure your career to capture value? Not just create value. You can create value by taking great pictures and telling great stories. That creates value in the world. Lots of people might see it, might change some things. But how do you capture that value? Turn it into money so that you can do what you're going to do. Not that everything has to do that, but you have to think about the capturing part of the value. So this is, so I'm going to focus in on competencies, which you can see the graph in the top right-hand corner with the 4 areas. And the report's sort of broken down in those 4 areas and goes into lots of detail. I'm going to focus on competencies. And so this is just sort of a summary. And in the left column is the old paradigm, and I split it between mainstream and independent journalism because there was a really strong separation between those in the old paradigm. Now they're merging. I mean, we have this quote from David Weinberger that says there's no more mainstream anymore. Because of what's going on in the competitive landscape. So the core competency went from content to community building, from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. And I'll say more about that in a minute. Point of view, in the old paradigm, it's seeking objectivity, and for independent journalists, it can be advocacy journalists, like progressive and conservative journalism can be more advocacy-oriented. But the new paradigm is new ways of reporting. I have here declarative and adaptive journalism and something I call Socratic journalism, which I'll talk more about in a second. But the ethics here changes. It goes from trying to be neutral and objective to being transparent. and being innovative with different ways of storytelling. So the core functions, before you had a trained journalism, the professionalism was really important, but in the new paradigm, it's about being multi-platform, about integrating journalists and technologists. Technologists can be good journalists, and actually treating them as journalists and not as just the tech guys creates brand new journalistic experiences. And then the technology, in the old paradigm, it was about managing physical distribution limits. That's the expertise that people had. And now it's about experimentation. Many, many, many experiments. And how good you are at doing that sort of experimentation. And the last thing is ways of working. Before you had tried and true models, it's about new models that are somewhat counterintuitive. And that kind of connects to the experimentation. But looking at counterintuitive and transmedia is one that's sort of a counterintuitive storytelling way of doing storytelling. So the 6 key competencies from the report. One is immediacy. Everything about the web is becoming more immediate. There's real-time analytics. The Twitter is not about what happened 5 minutes ago. It's about like what happened right now. And I don't know, has anybody used something called iFi? It's like a little memory card that goes into cameras. Has anybody used that? Do you like it? You just got it, yeah. It's this memory card that as you shoot, it goes right up and it can go to Twitter and it can go to Flickr as you shoot, like immediate. And I think being able to match the quality of storytelling with the immediacy of things is going to be a competency that's really key. A lot more is going to be, in the future, is going to be a story unfolding and us bringing them along with quality images and quality storytelling as it unfolds. Not doing that and then having time to prepackage it. Like, there'll still be prepackaging, but more and more it's going to shift to things that are immediate and granular. Strong point of view is really important. Photography isn't just an end in itself, it's a means to end. So more and more people have to have something to say. Like when I used to shoot as a photographer, I would be like a fly on the wall or something like that, and I'd have to sort of objectively record what's going on. But now being declarative is a strategic advantage. And we can see it at a sort of a top level between Fox and CNN. So Fox has a really strong partisan point of view. Their viewership's going up. CNN's trying to be balanced, trying to, be neutral, and they're struggling with stuff. And we've seen this across the web. People are becoming more sort of balkanized in different points of view with the web. And it's because it builds loyalty, it builds audiences. There's problems around democracy with that. There's problems around people having sort of homogenous points of view if they only go to one source of news. But that's sort of what's building audiences now. That's what's working, and that's how the competitive landscape is changing. And also we've heard tons about consumers now being producers. We've heard a lot about that, but the key thing about that is that now consumers, we have a different sort of consumer. We have a consumer that understands what it takes to put things together. How a media maker, like when I was uncomfortable with the power I had as a photographer, they understand that I can manipulate the point of view. And so all of a sudden, media literacy becomes much greater, and then having a strong point of view and claiming a stake and being declarative about your point of view as a media maker gives you the context to make it relevant to folks. So relevancy is another one. We have a quote in the report that said, it was from a Facebook focus group that the New York Times did, and they were asking young people, how do you get the news? And he goes, well, I don't go get the news. I don't go to news sites. If it's news, it'll find me. And I felt like, wow, that just like encapsulates what's going on with the shift in news. If it's news, it'll find me. It's through my networks and my relationships, and if it's relevant to me, people have personalized news. They just want to get what's relevant to them. I think relevancy can happen in another way, and that is through intimacy. And I think if photographers and content makers can bring people along in a way that it's almost like it's not the truth. We're not talking about the truth. We're not talking about, our truth. We're actually, when we do our storytelling, we're making it intimate and relevant to somebody so they see it as their truth. And you do that by being personal. Like photographers so often don't want to talk about their photographs. It's sort of a classic thing where like the image speaks for itself. But if you can actually talk about your photograph, put yourself into it, and bring a degree of intimacy to it because you have a point of view, then it makes it more relevant. So that's one of the key competencies. So engagement. The product of, I had this in an earlier slide, the product of journalism is no longer content, it's community. Unfortunately, I think content's going to continue to go down in terms of being able to be paid for it. And it's going to be diversifying your revenue streams. It's going to be about building the reputation, the loyalty, all that sort of stuff you're going to be able to capture value for it. So that's going to be the recipe for success, both for individuals and I think for media companies. And so I didn't say Socratic journalism, if you know Socratic teaching method, it's a teaching method where the teacher doesn't impart expert knowledge, but actually gets people to play off each other by asking questions and getting them to debate. I think journalists will more and more facilitate that process as a story unfolds, not prepackaged, not imparting expertise they have about a beat or whatever knowledge they have about a subject. They'll be the one that can actually facilitate the interaction, the questions, get people to debate with each other, do that with images, do that with words. So that's what I was calling Socratic journalism. The non-intuitive ways of working, we'll hear more about transmedia later, but I just wanted to put that. Think of ways that aren't the tried and true way you know how to do storytelling and experiment with it. And the last is being entrepreneurial and multifaceted. I call it journalpreneur. That's a little corny word, but it's literally, you can't be a content producer. You have to be a content producer, a marketer, a publisher. You have to wear all those hats. And it's really, learning the best from the tech entrepreneurial world, and bringing that to what you do. So this is the last quote, and it's from Clay Shirky, who some of you all have probably read, and he was one of the interviews we had in the report. And he said, there may be distinctions between professionals and amateurs, between breaking news and follow-up pieces, between long or short and so forth, but these are just artifacts of production methods rather than deep truths, and we have to be truth tellers. And at the end of the day, I think we always have to ask ourselves when we're media makers, what does media do for people? Like, it's not just about telling things we want to tell or things we think people should pay attention to. We have to bring it back to what does media do for people? What problems does it solve? Desires fulfilled, needs met. So that's it. Okay.